Welcome back to another episode of Reddit Titan. In today's episode, the user asked the question, Mental health workers of Reddit, what's the most f***ed up thing you have seen? And these are the craziest answers you're not going to believe. I worked in a psychiatric medical institute for children. One girl, 13, had been pimped out by her mother and abused by several men. One night at bedtime routines, she hadn't come out of the shower yet and had locked herself in. When she finally opened the door, she had bit into her hand, and her veins and tendons were showing. She kept moving her hand to watch them move. Craziest thing was that once she was transported to the hospital, her mother made jokes about how her daughter just wanted to see what it tasted like. This girl basically turned into a celebrity around the campus because all the other children thought she was edgy for what she had done. As a psychologist, I sometimes pick up hours at local clinics, weekends mostly. I specialize in children and family issues. Family came in randomly with their 5-year-old son. He had not spoken in a month, not a word. A month ago, this poor child watched as his 6-year-old brother drowned in the family pool. The parents were unaware that both kids had gone outside. Unbelievable trauma. The 5-year-old had a 1,000-yard stare. Parents were crushed. Not a mental health worker, but a camp counselor at a camp for underprivileged kids. We had a camper who had blind rage. He would be completely normal, then randomly would snap. The very last day of camp, he was just waiting in line for something when someone threw a rock and it hit the kid who had blind rage directly in the eye, causing him to bleed from his eye. I would have never heard a worse scream in my entire life. He then starts running towards the kid who hit him in the eye. He took 4 staff to get this 10-year-old to not kill another kid. By far, the most heartbreaking things for me usually involved repetitive movements and the person being nonverbal. Let me explain. I was helping cover a night shift for a residential treatment center. As I'm doing room checks, I hear this repetitive banging sound coming from the room at the farthest end of the hall. Go down there as quickly as I can and see the girl laying face down, raising her upper body off the pillow and slamming back down on the bed, over and over and over again. While she was asleep, when I grabbed another staff, they just kind of shrugged and said, "Yeah, she does it like every night." It's sad, isn't it? Turns out it's a thing called RMD. It can sometimes happen to kids for a variety of reasons, but hers was definitely mental health and trauma related. Also, had another teenage girl get brought in right after a guy had picked her up, gotten her high on bath salts, and sexually assaulted her. I saw her sitting in a chair, completely nonverbal, with an absolute blank expression on her face, bruises and cuts on her neck and legs, just rocking back and forth and twisting and pulling her hair to the point it was all just a giant knot. I can handle screaming, sobbing, fighting, and all of that, but when you see someone who's completely non-responsive, just doing the same movements over and over again, you feel completely at a loss. I'm not a mental health worker myself, but I do remember one girl I saw while I was put in a psych ward about a year ago or so. In the place I stayed in particular, most of us were there because of self-harm and suicidal tendencies. However, there was one little girl who was somewhere between 8 and 10 who was very difficult. I was in there a whole 3 days, and every day she would have screaming, thrashing, punching panic attacks to the point where she would have to be given shots to force her to sleep. She was a nuisance, as she was violent and would hit people, as well as being mostly mute. But at the same time, I felt bad for her. It takes a lot to make someone, especially at her age, completely lose grip with reality like that. I don't know the full story, or even if this is true, but apparently both of her parents had died. I don't know how, but I know that she had been abused badly by whoever she was living with. She didn't have friends, and I doubt she had been in school for a while, seeing as she had been in the ward for a long time. I think about that a lot. I hope she's living a better life. Not a worker. I was a patient in a facility. As expected, everything was made so we wouldn't be able to hurt ourselves. One day, another patient was able to hide one of the plastic utensils we used to eat. They counted them before we threw our plates away, so I don't know how she did it. While we were all in the common room, she stabbed herself in the neck with it after sharpening it, and she was just pouring blood. Nurses wanted quickly, and she was rushed out. We were sent to our rooms as they cleaned up. We were given an extra night snack later, though. Don't work in the mental health profession, But I remember when I was in basic combat training, there was a girl in my platoon who often just stared at us without blinking. She opened her mouth to speak, but would just mumble. She'd sometimes say things about eyes being very aware, watching her, and I think she refused to eat the food provided because she was paranoid. She had a weird speech pattern as well, and at night when we were sleeping in the female barracks, she was caught wandering around talking to herself and the supposed giant spider she claimed to see crawling on the ceiling. Long story short, she was sent to the psych ward after having a mental breakdown that was triggered by the presence of the drill sergeants. She claimed they looked like demons. Come to find out, she was paranoid, schizophrenic, and they did not even catch that in her mental evaluation before shipping her to training. Not a worker, but when my sister was checked into the psych ward after a suicide attempt, I went and visited her and got to meet some interesting people. My sister had made some friends there, and one of her friends had hallucinations, auditory and visual. This boy was no older than 16, and his explanation of what he saw was f***ing horrifying. Basically, he was always surrounded by ninjas who raped him and were always watching him. Now at first, it sounds kind of bizarre and maybe even funny, but really think about it. Vanta black, hooded figures were always somewhere in the room watching him. The only visible thing on their bodies were the eyes. He said that ninjas would rape and torture him at random, and if they weren't doing that, they'd be in the corners of the room telling him to kill himself. This boy was always looking around, giving blank stares to random places in the room. The most f***ed up thing is that you'd see him start to tear up and shake. He just felt so helpless. I hope he finds peace one day. I think about him a lot. While working in jail, I was called to someone's cell to assess him for homicidal ideations. When I got there, he had carved pieces of his legs out and stated he was a follower of Satan, whom told him he needed to release some spirits from his body. He had a long history of self-harm, including swallowing glass. He had a high threshold for pain. Jail was not a place he should have been at, but unfortunately, mental health funding is one of the first to go when there are budget cuts. Got stories for days. Thanks to a family member who worked as one of 3 mental health first responders in a meth-ravaged city of over 100,000. There's the dude who was found in the park with his hands completely rubbed raw because he was using rocks to remove his fingerprints. Severe paranoia, thought the mob and CIA were after him. The 600 LB lady who had a psychotic episode and thought God told her to reach inside of her cat managed to fit her giant arm down the cat's throat. But when the cat died, she couldn't get the cat off. Someone called the police because of the sound of someone shoving their arm down a live cat. Blood everywhere and deep scratches. She apparently got her arm in there down to about the elbow. My family member showed up after the cat was removed from her arm, but heard about the scene from more than one officer. He then had to interview this woman after she did that. Crazy stuff. Security guard, 20 years ago, working in a crackhead alley in Toronto. Listening to all the stories of how normal people like you and me went from a normal life and a gateway, drugs, booze, gambling, to living on the streets. Addicted to crack and heroin. Being so focused on getting that next high, being willing to suck, share needles, anywhere, do anything, just to get that next fix. What still to this day scares the ever living shit out of me, and the reason I stay away from all the gateway addiction activities, is how quickly and easily it can happen. I found too many dead in an alleyway, or girls so badly beaten by $20 John, they were unrecognizable. All for a fix. Kids screaming for hours because mom is so high, she's unconscious. A system so broken, I can't help any of them, other than helping to load them up in an ambulance. A system so broken that beautiful, wonderful people, in the span of months, are face down in their own vomit, choking to death. People that went from living like the Jones to living in absolute hell and not caring. I watched someone walk off the top story of an apartment building because they were so high they didn't know. I could go on for hours, the horrors I've seen that still give me nightmares today. Not a mental professional, but someone who dealt with it in the trenches. Not a worker, But I was in adolescent psych ward for 2 weeks a few months ago. By far the most up shit was how brutal the fights were between patients and how staff barely did anything about them. The attitude the other kids had were crazy. One girl who was maybe 12 just started attacking another girl for calling her a bitch, who was 11 and so much smaller than her, and made her face bleed all over the common room. There was blood everywhere. We found dry blood the next morning on the chairs. The girl who punched the 11-year-old was scheduled to leave the same day this all happened and was discharged shortly after. Crazy stuff, man. No clue how she got to go home after making a tiny girl's face leak. Hope you guys enjoyed that episode. If you did, please like the video, subscribe for more content coming soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.